Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're continuing our series highlighting some of our favorite instructors. And this time, I'm joined by Kelly Hamilton. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Ashley.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became involved with NCBRT to start off?
So, Ashley, it's a long story because it was a long time ago. I think I've been with NCBRT for 24 years. It's been a while. And it's kind of interesting how I became involved with NCBRT. When I was a criminal investigator for the state of Wyoming, and this was after 9/11, but not too far after 9/11, the country was still very concerned about terrorism. And one of the types, Wyoming, of course, is a very rural state with lots of agricultural crimes. And I investigated a lot of those types of rural crimes, being a rural deputy to start with. Anyway, I became aware of an NCBRT training on agri-terrorism, of all things. And I went to it, and, it was about using bio agents and chemicals against the agricultural industry, maybe not necessarily to kill people, but to somehow affect the economy. And I just absolutely became fascinated with bioterrorism and then NCBRT in general. So I talked to a couple of the instructors that were there, and they said, "Well, yeah, let's think about making you an instructor." And the rest is history. And here I am today, 20 some years later.
Awesome. So I know you've had some really interesting experience both in the U.S. and abroad. Can you tell us some of the most pivotal moments in your career that kind of shaped you, both as a person, as a first responder, and as an instructor?
Yeah, and you're right, Ashley, there are some pivotal moments. And being raised and born in Wyoming, and then being in law enforcement there, and then after that, in between law enforcement jobs, I did some work for Carnival Cruise Lines on board one of their vessels, and then went back to law enforcement in Wyoming, ultimately retired. And I don't like to use the word retired, and we can talk about that, but got my time in and moved on to a little bit of a different job. And and this is all leading to something, I promise. And my wife is a social worker, so she kind of challenged me. Okay, you've seen families and children from the law enforcement side of things. How about you see it from my side of things, from the social work side? And I ran a program called the Citizen Review Panel in Wyoming for a few years. And then I became a biosecurity director for the New Mexico State University. And then I was tapped to be leadership in New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And during that time, we experienced COVID. We experienced the state's worst fires here in New Mexico, wildland fires here in New Mexico. And the overarching principle through all of those is that you've got to have a good understanding and appreciation for culture. And if you understand and consider culture in about everything you do, and take yourself out of your perspective and look at things from the perspective of the person you're dealing with, assisting, helping, even arresting, you get a much broader perspective on things. So everything I've done, and I do a lot, I'm just so honored to do a lot of work with the tribes. And NCBRT has a great tribal program. I've been very, very fortunate to do a lot of international work in Iraq and places like that, West Africa. And it's very interesting when you put culture first, Ashley, and you try and understand the culture that people are living in and how they perceive things. your work and the energy you put into it is much more effective because you kind of have a multi-dimensional view of things as opposed to just a, very linear view.
Sure.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, that's great.
one of the absolute pivotal moments is, working with our tribes across the nation in different aspects, working on the border and the asylum seeking process. I became so enthralled with that, and I ended up getting my doctorate in management and international homeland security issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but the pivotal for me is trying to understand culture, and I can never put myself in somebody else's shoes necessarily, but I can do my best to understand their perspective of what their needs are, what they bring to the table, or what they want to talk about.
Awesome. You mentioned a little bit about, how you don't like to describe yourself as retired. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of like your experience being a quote unquote retired person, but also an instructor, how you kind of present yourself that way?
Ashley, I can talk about this all day. I'll try to keep it short.
Go for it.
It's been a year or two now, one of our subject matter experts in NCBRT's tribal program, we were at an event together and instructing. And after I gave my introduction, he took me aside and he said, why do you say, and I'd say his name, but he's kind of humble. I don't know that he'd want me to. He said, why do you introduce yourself as retired? And I said, well, I've done this, this, and this, and now I'm doing this. And he goes, that's exactly correct. You've done this, this, and this, and now you're doing this. And he said, a life lesson in a pivotal moment. He said, in the tribal communities, we oftentimes don't use the word retired. We say recycled. And so I kind of like that because actually I still want to be in the game and I still think I've got something to offer. And so I'm recycled and just absolutely blessed to be an instructor and a subject matter expert and working for NCBRT. And the other thing to take that just a little bit further is I'm an assessor for NCBRT and have the honor of assessing other instructors. And NCBRT believes strongly, one of their pillars, if you will, in instructor development, instructor growth. That's something that's near and dear to NCBRT's core mission. And part of that is an assessment program. And so I encourage other instructors, let's say they're teaching law enforcement or a rescue task force class. And that's a pretty active, hands-on, got to be pretty current in everything, or at least got to have some good, strong foundational principles there. And I see him get up and proudly talk about, did this for this many years and then retired, did this for this many years and then retired. And now that I'm retired, I instruct for NCBRT. No, NCBRT has chosen you, and you have chosen NCBRT, and you're still in the game. You may not ever know, but the information that you're presenting and what others are getting from you is undoubtedly going to save a life. And you may never know that, whether it's instructor development workshop course, or it's one of our law enforcement courses or hazmat courses, you're still in the game. And so you're not retired. You're just in the game as a different player. And so that's kind of how I see retired.
All right. So we talked a little bit about kind of your teaching philosophy and things like that. But, we are also continuously learning. All of our instructors constantly, making sure to stay up on how we all learn and things like that. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a learner and your education? You mentioned you have a doctorate, you've been back to school for things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can. I was born and raised with a learner mindset because I inherited that from my mom and dad. I saw my mom and dad do that. And as instructors with NCBRT, if you think about it, we would be somewhat hypocritical to stand in front of an audience and tell them, or a group of adult learners, and tell them you need to have a growth mindset if we didn't have a growth mindset ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's near and dear in my heart. And there's not a day goes by that I don't learn something new. And when I'm instructing, I oftentimes tell, and other instructors do this as well, oftentimes tell the participants, we are going to learn as much from you as you are going to learn from us and the material that we give you. And so if you create that environment, that safe environment where adult learners can ask questions, they can be credited and given a little pat on the back when they volunteer something that's appropriate. Personally, I just love to learn. I absolutely love to learn. I love new things. And interestingly, some of that comes from, as I mentioned, my mom was a college professor and my dad was a rancher. But both of them have sadly passed away a number of years ago. But I remember my dad at 86 or 87 learning the internet and learning how to send emails on the internet. And they're just priceless. I've still got them.
Yeah.
And so I think I was very fortunate to inherit that learner-centered mindset, that growth mindset. And to really have a growth mindset, I think there's an element of leadership there that I've always instilled in those that I supervised or the agency I administrated. I gave them as many opportunities. I gave people as many opportunities as possible to learn, even if it meant they discovered something that they wanted to do other than what they were doing right now in my agency. That was still a success. So growth mindset, approaching things learner-centered are key to everything in my mind. And then as part of that growth mindset, I decided, here's an interesting story. And it's a Kelly story, but it's a good story and it's kind of from my heart. My wife and I mentioned she was a social worker, and we had guardianship of our daughter from about age 9. She's in her 20s now. And she had educational challenges like any student. But I remember her sitting around the living room table, the dining room table one day, and she was studying really hard. And she had a Pomeranian up on the table where it shouldn't have been, but they were both just really studying. And I had always been talking about, I need to get my doctorate someday. And she looked up, and I was helping her with her math, which probably was very little help. And she said, well, if I have to go to school and get this high school degree, why don't you kind of shut up nicely and finish your doctorate? And so that was really the impetus behind me getting my doctorate. But I enjoyed every minute of it. And it was in an area that I very much is near and dear to my heart, and that being border and asylum-seeking issues, that sort of thing.
That's
international homeland security.
That's really great.
So it's really my daughter's fault, I guess I would say.
They have the habit of pushing us to do the things that we're supposed to do.
They do. They hold parents accountable, and that's important.
Yeah, that's great. So to wrap us up today, kind of circling back to the topic of retirement, what advice do you have for first responders preparing for retirement, for leaving the field in active capacity, right?
Ashley, you hit the nail on the head. You're leaving the field in an active capacity. And law enforcement, fire, all these professions really tighten it brotherhood and sisterhood, because you see and deal with so many challenging events, and sometimes sadly the worst of society, and you experience some trauma bonding a lot of the information that we debrief and talk about at the end of the day for stress relief, for mental health, we don't even realize we're doing it. When you leave that, as you say, active field, you lose the ability to have those conversations because you no longer are involved in that activity.
Mhm.
NCBRT, this is just an amazing organization because all these first responders have come together, and we are a subculture, almost 300 of us, but we share a common thread of the courses we're teaching, the experiences we've had, and those sorts of things. So you're kind of able to replace that, what you had, with something feels pretty good now.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, you're still in the game and you're making a difference. You're not retired. There's no reason to say you're retired. That just brings the audience down, if you will. I choose to work for NCBRT. I've got this experience, and here's what I'm going to share. So no matter what you do, and I just had a birthday the other day, and I turned 63. I don't do
Happy
birthdays
birthday.
well. But as you mature and you recycle, if you keep that growth mindset and that open frame of mind, that there's also something else besides law enforcement or fire. There's instructing. There's a multitude of different things that you can become involved in and stay mentally healthy.
Mhm. One thing I really liked and that you mentioned in our preparation meeting is the idea that you can continue to protect and serve through through teaching. And could you talk a little bit more about that?
I can. I heard one of our administrators one day with NCBRT, that person said, gosh, I wish people wouldn't say, when they get up and introduce themselves as an NCBRT instructor, I wish they wouldn't say, well, I'm retired and non-retired teaching NCBRT. And I thought, so as an assessor, I'm just going to just try and experiment here a little bit.
Mhm.
And when I would assess somebody, and we've got amazing first responders working for us, and I would hear them say, I'm retired, but I want you to talk. I want you to listen to me while I talk about this. I suggested to one of them, I said, just take out the word retired and say, I did this, this, and this. And now again, I'm teaching for NCBRT, and we're going to have a conversation. You're going to share some stuff with me. I'm going to share some experiences with you. We're going to share some proven facts from the manual, from science. And I've kind of sat back as an assessor and watched people, oh, this feels pretty good. And people are kind of talking to me now, and there's more engagement and more interaction
Mhm.
and more learner-centered. It's just all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's about all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and hopefully be hearing from you again on the podcast very soon. So thank
All
you.
right. Ashley, thank you.
Had we- If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.